Okay, let's unpack this. We are doing a deep dive today that's meant to be something of a shortcut, a fast track, really, to understanding the huge, immense field of psychology.
Hmm.
We're not just going to be defining terms, we're exploring the founding debates, the science, and maybe most importantly for you, the learner, we're getting into the research-backed ways to actually succeed.
And that's key because psychology is so often misunderstood. I mean, people hear the word and they immediately think of therapy on a couch.
Right.
But our sources define it, formally as the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. And it's this incredibly active, dynamic science. It affects every single part of our lives.
When you say behavior, you mean everything.
Everything from, a complex boardroom meeting all the way down to rats and pigeons in a lab. It covers humans, non-human animals, all of it.
And the reason we're doing this dive is, well, it's simple. The value is just enormous. Studying psychology can dramatically increase your chances for success, whether that's academic, professional, or personal.
Absolutely. It gives you the tools for self-understanding. It's a direct line back to that old Socratic idea, know thyself.
But it's more than just self-help.
Oh, much more. It fundamentally improves your critical thinking. You learn how to objectively evaluate information, how to compare conflicting sources, analyze arguments, and then synthesize new knowledge. I mean, those are essential skills for living in the world today.
So to get a handle on the modern field, we really have to go back. We have to look at the intellectual battles that basically founded psychology.
Right, and we can trace the official start, the ground zero, to a very specific time and place.
1879. Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig, Germany, the first ever psychology lab. He's called the father of psychology for a reason.
He is. And his initial approach was something called structuralism. You can think of him as trying to kind of reverse engineer the mind. He and his students were interested in the basic building blocks, the structures of our conscious experience, sensations, images, feelings. They used a very careful method called introspection to ask, fundamentally, what is the mind made of?
But the second that idea crossed the Atlantic, it hit a wall. It ran right into the American counterargument, which came from William James.
The father of American psychology.
Yeah.
James pioneered functionalism. And he basically argued that focusing on the structure of the mind was, kind of useless if you didn't understand its purpose.
Its function.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Functionalism shifted the whole focus from what the mind is to how the mind functions to help us adapt to our environment. What does the mind do for us? And that just blew the doors open for what they could study, emotions, observable behaviors. It set the stage for so much of what came next.
And then, of course, you get the earthquake.
Sigmund Freud?
The psychoanalytic perspective. He just completely sidestepped the whole conscious experience debate and argued that the real driver was, what? This deep, dark well of unconscious processes.
Unresolved conflicts, past experiences, all of it. And this is where the field really split. Now, Freud's ideas, which were often controversial, lots of focus on aggressive or sexual motives, they dominated the first half of the 20th century.
But that's not where we are today.
No, not really. Contemporary psychologists have moved past that rigidity. Today we call the modern version the psychodynamic perspective. It still focuses on unconscious dynamics, but it's much more flexible. It integrates modern findings, and it often emphasizes social and cultural factors, not just Freud's original and, frankly, limited drive theory.
So here's where it gets really interesting, because after those big founding debates, the field just splintered. And if you're trying to shortcut your learning, you really need to grasp the basic ideas behind the 7 modern perspectives.
Well, let's focus on the big contrasts. So you have the behavioral perspective, which was championed by people like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner. And this was a direct, forceful rejection of both introspection and Freud's invisible unconscious.
They didn't care what was happening in your head.
Not at all. They focused only on what was objective and observable. Environmental influences, stimulus-response relationships. Skinner was, incredibly successful at showing how conditioning could be used to shape behavior, essentially ignoring the black box of the mind.
That extremism, though, it created a counter-movement.
A powerful one. In the 1950s, you get the humanistic perspective, led by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. And they argued that the other two camps were just too deterministic.
What do you mean by that?
They believed that humans weren't just puppets of their unconscious or their environment. Humanists stress free will, our ability to choose our own path, and self-actualization.
That's that inborn drive to become your best self.
Exactly. It's this positive, growth-seeking perspective that puts control back in the hands of the individual. It's fundamentally optimistic.
So we've got the unconscious past from Freud, the observable present from behaviorism, and the positive self from humanism. But what about the brain itself? The hardware?
Right, and that's where the other modern views fill in the gaps. The biological perspective looks at genetics, brain structures, all the biochemistry. Then you have the cognitive perspective, which is kind of the return of the mind.
It focuses on how we process information thinking, memory, problem solving.
Precisely. And finally, you have the evolutionary perspective, which zooms way out and asks how our behaviors might have helped our ancestors survive. It uses concepts like natural selection to explain why we act the way we do.
And this is where we get those really fascinating explanations for social behaviors, like the grandmother hypothesis.
Oh, it's a fantastic example. It tries to explain why humans live so much longer than other primates. The theory is that grandmothers, by acting as backup caregivers, helped their grandchildren survive.
Which let their own daughters have more children sooner.
Right. So that longevity gave a reproductive advantage that evolution selected for. It's a great case of using Darwinian logic to understand social dynamics.
But the bottom line really is that no single one of these perspectives has all the answers. The unifying idea today is the biopsychosocial model.
And that model basically says that everything is interconnected. Your biology, your genes, your brain chemistry interacts with your psychological factors like learning and motivation, and also with social forces, your family, your culture.
It's a holistic view. Nothing happens in a vacuum.
Never. And this is so critical when you look at culture. Our sources make this great contrast between individualistic cultures, like in North America, and collectivistic cultures.
In individualistic cultures, it's all about me, my needs, my goals.
Whereas in collectivistic cultures, the person is defined by their relationships, their interdependence within the group. And the practical implication of that is huge.
How so?
Well, take a concept like sincerity. In the U.S., being sincere means acting how you feel inside, being authentic. In a collectivistic culture, sincerity means conforming your behavior to your role and your duties.
So you could completely misread a situation.
Easily. You could cause major conflict, all because you don't understand that underlying psychological framework.
And speaking of frameworks, we can't talk about the structure of the field without honoring the diversity pioneers. I mean, the early days were not inclusive.
Not at all. But you have figures like Mary Calkins, who did all the work for a PhD at Harvard, but was denied the degree because she was a woman. She went on to become the first female president of the APA.
And then there's the work of Kenneth and Mamie Clark.
Their research truly showed the societal power of psychology. Their studies on the effects of prejudice and segregation were cited directly in the Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education ruling.
Wow.
That research took the science of behavior and moved it right into the heart of civil justice. And that's a powerful transition point as we move into how research is actually done.
Okay, that transition from broad theory to, provable facts brings us right to the scientific core of psychology. There are three major research methods. Let's start with descriptive research.
Descriptive research is pretty much what it sounds like. It simply observes and records behavior and mental processes. It doesn't manipulate anything.
So its goal is just description.
Exactly. This includes things like naturalistic observation, just watching behavior in the real-world surveys, and case studies.
And that brings us back to that incredible example with the Himalayan climbers from our sources.
Right, the archival study. So researchers analyzed data from over 30,000 climbers, and they found that teams from cultures with a high degree of hierarchy, where, you just obey the leader no matter what, they actually had more success getting to the summit.
There was a kicker.
There's a huge kicker.
Yeah.
Those same hierarchical expeditions had a significantly higher death rate.
Why?
The researchers concluded that the rigid structure actually stopped lower ranking, but maybe more experienced team members from speaking up. They couldn't share crucial information about weather or dangerous routes. The psychological climate of the team literally became a life or death factor.
That is a perfect illustration. So the second major method is correlational research. This is about measuring the relationship between two things to help us predict.
Okay, and this is maybe the most critical alert for you, the listener. If you take one thing away from this science section, it has to be this. Correlation can never prove cause and effect.
It's the biggest mistake people make.
It is. We call this the third variable problem. You might see a strong correlation between, say, kids who play violent video games and aggressive behavior.
Sure.
But a third, unmeasured factor like stress at home, or maybe a pre-existing aggressive personality, might be causing both the desire to play those games and the aggressive behavior. The two things just happen to move together. One doesn't necessarily cause the other.
And our own brains work against us here with something called illusory correlation.
They absolutely do. This is when we mistakenly believe a relationship exists when it doesn't. It's basically the foundation of superstition.
Like knocking on wood, you do it once before something good happens and your brain forges a link.
Precisely. And that's fueled by two biases. First, saliency bias. You focus on that one dramatic, rare time it worked. And second, confirmation bias. You actively remember the times it worked and conveniently forget the 99 times it didn't. Learning to spot that in yourself is, well, it's fundamental to critical thinking.
So to get past just description and prediction and actually get to psychology's main goal, explanation, we have to use experimental research.
This is the gold standard. It's the only method that can determine cause and effect.
How does it do that?
In an experiment, the researcher systematically manipulates one thing, the independent variable, or IV, to see what effect it has on another thing, the dependent variable, or DV. And crucially, they have to control for everything else, usually by randomly assigning people to different groups. That control is what lets you isolate the cause.
And we have to touch on the ethics. For humans, the standards from organizations like the APA are non-negotiable. You need informed consent and voluntary participation.
Meaning, the person has to understand any risks and be totally free to walk away at any time. We also use non-human animals, mostly rats and mice, in about 7 or 8% of studies. And this is only done when the research is valuable and simply can't be done with humans, with very strict rules to minimize any suffering.
The sources gave a really powerful example. A study on rats fed a diet high in fats and sugars showed they had serious problems with learning and memory.
Right, and that's critical information for understanding how diet affects our brains. But think about it. You could never ethically force-feed a group of human children a high-fat diet for years just to see what happens to their memory. The necessity for that animal research becomes very clear.
Okay, let's pivot to application, because everything we've talked about has direct relevance to improving your life, especially your success as a learner. Let's start by just tearing down the bad habits.
The research here is so clear. The two techniques students rely on the most, highlighting and rereading, are among the absolute least effective.
Why? They feel so productive.
They do, but it's a false mastery. You're just passively recognizing the words on the page. You're not actually recalling the concept underneath.
And what about cramming, the all-nighter?
Massed practice, as it's called. It's far, far less efficient than spacing your study out over time, what we call distributed practice. Cramming might get you through the test tomorrow, but distributed practice is what actually locks the knowledge in for the long term.
So if that's what doesn't work, what does?
The science is totally unambiguous. For real grade improvement, the two most powerful techniques are distributed practice, and this is the big one, practice testing.
Practice testing meaning self-quizzing.
Yeah.
Flashcards.
Exactly. Using flashcards, working through old exams, anything that forces your brain to actively retrieve the information. It transforms that passive recognition into active recall, which is how you really encode memories.
So we need to be more active in our learning.
You do. We recommend methods like active reading. There's one called the SQ4R method. Survey, question, read, recite, review, and write. The goal of all those steps is to make your brain engage deeply with the material.
You also need to aim for something called overlearning.
Right. This means you keep reviewing and testing yourself on material past the point where you first understand it. You keep going until it's just locked in. That extra encoding time is essential, especially for fighting test anxiety.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think about a common U.S. penny. You've seen one thousands of times. But if I asked you right now to draw it from Memory Lincoln's profile, the exact text where "In God We Trust" is, you'd probably fail.
Yeah, I would.
Why? Because you've only ever needed to recognize it. You never had to encode and overlearn the details. For test material, you have to push past that superficial recognition to deep encoding.
And a final tip for the learner. Maximize your time. Use those little spare moments. 5 minutes waiting for a bus, 10 minutes on a line to review. It's distributed practice on a micro level.
So we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've defined psychology. We've traced its history from Wundt and James and Freud. We synthesized the 7 modern views, unified by that biopsychosocial model. And we armed you with the essential scientific knowledge, especially how to spot the danger of confusing correlation with causation.
And, most importantly, we've given you practical, research-based tools to improve your own learning. Emphasizing that active retrieval over those passive habits, the real value of psychology isn't just in understanding the world, it's in understanding why you perceive, think, and act the way you do.
which brings us back to one core finding that really shows the power of all this. We mentioned that practice testing can significantly reduce the negative effects of stress and anxiety.
So what does this all mean? We know that anxiety often creates this feeling of threat, right? That a situation is beyond your capacity. So if that's true, how does a simple practical act like self-quizzing psychologically change your appraisal of that challenge? By doing it, you're not just studying. You are actively transforming that feeling of an external threat into an internal feeling of control and preparedness. And that subtle psychological shift from fear to competence is the ultimate lesson in the interplay between mind and action that psychology invites you to explore.